Oh, so hello and welcome back to another CEO series here at Heal at Scaled. I'm obviously Simon Penson, and I'm delighted today to introduce our latest guest, Lee Fuller, the CEO of a really interesting kind of search business called Flaunt Digital. Um, Lee, brilliant to have you on. Thank you for kind of joining us. I thought it would be really interesting, perhaps, to give a longer intro, but I'm a great believer in the fact that nobody knows your story better than you. So, do you want to start and give us a little bit of a background and a bit of obviously an elevator pitch on Flaunt as well?
Yeah. So my background on a personal level is, well, started in web development. What seems like an age ago now, going back probably 19, 20 years, which led me down the SEO route after some time. So I've been in the industry going on 20 years, which makes me seem really old. um, so I've worked in a couple of different agencies, both small independents and network agencies before Flaunt, and then we're in our ninth year this year, so it's our ninth birthday in July. So Flaunt was set up in 2015 by myself and my co-founder Jamie, and I've held the CEO position there since we set up. In terms of Flaunt, the proposition hasn't changed too much. It's evolved in terms of the complexity of the services that we deliver, but in terms of specialisms, we sort of still only really take work on within search, which looks after both the paid side and the organic side, and web development. So full stack web development, software development, and that's kind of where we see our bread and butter and the most success really. We've grown year on year ever since we set up. We navigated the pandemic. We're in a good place. We're growing right now. So yeah, a good spot.
No, and I think that's very interesting. I'd love to kind of dig into what you're seeing right now because, it has been more difficult for a lot of people like in most businesses actually, but, agencies have found it tougher, I think, over the last year for macro reasons. So it's good that you're seeing, kind of what we're also seeing across the piece and that, pipelines are improving. So interested in that. But just before we jump into that, just give us a sense of sort of scale and stage that you're at. So roughly how many people, you share what you can share, but how many people, if you can share revenue, great. If not, don't worry. But just give people a sense of, what stage of scaling you're at.
Yeah, so we're 37 as of June. So we've got two people starting right at the start of June, which will take us to 37. We're on forecast to close just over 2.5 mil turnover, just over two of which will be fee income. So good trajectory. We're profitable. We have been since day one. I think the growth 23-24 versus the prior year is, I think off the top of my head, we're at about 23%, something like that. So it's been significant. Whereas I think the year before we were rounding out closer to 10. So I think that indicates the buoyancy of opportunity. And certainly in the last, I would say 3 to 6 months, we're noticing a lot more conversation, a lot more investment, bit of a shift in shorter term thinking. So less conversations around performance, more
Yeah.
conversations around brand, which is where we've sort of capitalized and where we live really as an agency.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to, because I think that nicely segues, doesn't it, into that kind of question of, like what are you seeing in the market now? Because, to grow that much in what has been, I say a tricky year is very interesting. And so it'd be good to get a sense of what you're seeing now in terms of, like pipe, older stuff in pipe and obviously what's coming in at the top. And also what like people are coming to you for, what sort of problems that they're asking you to solve.
Yeah, I mean, there's still opportunities that are legacy conversations, and I think the sales cycle throughout the pandemic and in the 18 months prior have it's definitely lengthened. You're seeing conversations that are taking over a year to get to the point where it's closed, and 9 times out of 10 as well, those conversations that are on that kind of cycle, the work that gets signed off at the end of it is completely different to the conversation that was at the start of the sales cycle. Whereas I think, like I said, the last sort of 3 to 6 months, there's a bit more urgency and a bit more definition to what brands are looking for. And I think that probably comes from a little bit more confidence in the market as a whole. Inflation coming down, cost of living starting to stabilize a little bit. A pandemic hopefully being firmly in the rearview mirror. A bit more confidence from people, and I think the turnaround, certainly with a handful of opportunities where we've had conversations that have turned around in 4 weeks. So I definitely think there's a shift happening at the moment.
Yeah, and I have the privilege of seeing both sides of the market, and those that are buying your kind of services are certainly planning more strategically now, I think, as opposed to, like you say, perhaps what has happened over the last 12, maybe 18 months, is that it's been very project based and tactical. Is that fair? Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, definitely would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So obviously it sounds like things are going great, and I think we were saying ahead of the call that, you definitely want to bask in that sunlight because, the realities of running a business, particularly people-based businesses are usually not that. So just talk to me a little bit about what is keeping you awake at night, and what you are thinking about as being potentially kind of next set of challenges, if that makes sense. So the less rosy end of the story.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, you enjoy the good, but there's there's been challenges along the way for sure. And I think we're at an interesting point in our growth because our operating model when we first set up was we didn't have an account management layer. We didn't have a team that just handled account management. We didn't have a client services layer. And I think we always knew that at some point that if we were to hit a certain size, we would need to dedicate some resource to that. So that's a challenge that we're looking at the moment, that we're thinking of how to best overcome. And I think it's definitely necessary. A lot of clients, like I say, that are turning into this brand conversation want longer term relationships. They want a bit more of a we sit on your side of the table kind of approach. So that's a challenge that we're facing at the moment. I think another one, I mean, debtors is always a cash is king, isn't it? Especially in agency. And I think the sales cycle increased, as did the debtor days. People taking a lot longer. Obviously, a lot of businesses are feeling the pressure and are under pressure to bring the revenue through the door themselves. So paying suppliers becomes a bit more tedious. So I think our debtor day increased by about, I think we were at about 63 days until recently. We've got it down to about 45, I think, at the moment. But
Yeah.
yeah, that increase of regular, consistent cash flow and having difficulty getting money through the door is a problem that we've
Yeah.
focused on quite heavily over the last sort of 12 months.
Yeah. And are you seeing that improving now slowly alongside the
Definitely, yeah. I think definitely better conversations. There's still some businesses that are getting back on track. And you have to approach everything for individually, really. You can't take it on a blanket approach. It's got to be case by case. But we've done a lot of work over the last 12 months to make sure that we're not exposing ourselves in any way, which is, I guess, all you can do in the market.
Certainly is. It certainly is. And on the CS challenge, right, is, not an unusual one. There's a certain level of scale where, that is required as much as you try and design it out. I think there's no way of avoiding it eventually. The stage is dependent upon how you do set yourself up internally, but, it was certainly perhaps one of the hardest challenges that we solved in, growing our agency business. And but then also the most rewarding commercially, actually, once you get it right. So
Mm.
it's an interesting next step for you. So and I think that probably brings us on again nicely into the, kind of my next question really around, you obviously have solved loads of problems as you've gone along on this journey. Are there any that really stand out as being ones that, like you were perhaps waking you up with cold sweats in the night, but you walk through them and you solve them and you kind of almost like now most proud of that experience, that journey, that solution?
Um, when we set up the agency, I was always dedicated to creating an environment that I would want to be part of. I think when it comes down to how we manage people and how we dedicate ourselves to making sure that people have not only everything that they need to do the job well, but also are catered for on a personal level. That's something that we sort of sat down right at the start before we'd even hired and ironed out. And I think the if you split Flaunt in half and look at like the first 4.5 years versus the second 4.5 years, I think in the first 4.5 years, that mission of being so dedicated to people and being so hooked into people, perhaps we perhaps took it a little bit too far. I think we've found a much better balance in terms of how we're able to support people in the best way, whilst maintaining culture and scaling. I think in the first half of our journey, we were definitely a little bit naive to the compromises that we were making.
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense. And actually, I think you're right. And we also fell foul to this in the fact that people talk a lot about processes and organizational structure and all of those things needing to change as you grow, but culture does too. And it's not kind of as overtly
Mm-hmm.
obvious, actually. And eventually it's why corporations, big businesses are how they are, because they kind of have to morph into that culturally. And I think that move from being very mission led kind of continues with you, but rather than it being like a small family environment almost, it has to move on to be much more performance orientated, and that can be quite a difficult switch. I think. I don't know how far along in that journey did you feel like you are?
Yeah, I think when you're the founder of the business, you wear a lot of hats for quite a long time. Whereas I think the last 3 years, I've really spent a lot of time along with the board getting operational structures in place that allow us to measure things properly, follow process properly, make sure that we're spending time in the right areas. These are all challenges that I think in probably the last 3 years, we've really nailed.
Yeah.
Um, it's something that we've had to almost learn on the job, but also take the time to educate. I think when you're so head down in the middle of a growing business, you forget that you need to spend time in different places. You get so caught up in delivering the work or building client relationships, bringing a new business, you forget that you've got to sit far enough back to actually put process in place to allow you to get to the next step. I think that's something that we've done really well in terms of how we measure the depth that we go into, and the data that we carry now is just it's phenomenal. Really, I think I'm not really in a position to be comparable with other businesses, but I would estimate that our granularity in terms of operating measurement is pretty up there.
Yeah, and that's very, very important. So, it's great to hear that you have that right, because it makes decision making much more objective, doesn't it, and clear. So, yeah, if you have the data in your fingertips, it's much easier. So, what therefore, having been through those series of, and I'm sure there are many more, those series of challenges, if you to rewind to the beginning again, and you knew at the start what you now know, what would you have done differently, if anything?
It's a tricky one, that, because I think what I've had to do in the last 9 years is really invest in educating myself to know where I'm best placed spending my time, but not only that, where my other board members are best placed spending their time, and then what down the line, what the senior leadership teams and the management teams are best placed spending their time doing. I think if I was starting again, if tomorrow was day one, I would be a lot better equipped at identifying senior level responsibilities. Like, I think myself, obviously, I've done a lot of learning and I've had to grow into the position that I'm in now. And I think our COO, again, he's had to follow the same path, but I think we've arrived at a place now where if we had to take those skills and build from the ground up again, we would know who and what skills to put in place right from day one. And I think we will probably do that slightly differently. And I think that comes from experience. But I think that in itself might frighten a lot of people from starting in the first place. So I would say that part of the journey is as valuable as starting in the first place. So you don't not start because of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I do. It's funny. I watched an interview with the Nvidia CEO and founder a couple of weeks ago, and that's precisely really what he said. He's like, I would never have started if I knew how difficult it was, actually. So sometimes that naive is actually a good thing. So yeah, I understand where you're
That,
coming from. So no, that's really helpful. So obviously you're 9 years in, you've got loads of experience, you've clearly learned a lot, you clearly have the IQ and the EQ to be able to do that, which is, the reason why you're there ultimately. What what does success now look like? What is the journey from here?
so we've got a very defined 3 year roadmap in front of us at the moment in terms of scale. We're clear about our capabilities. We're clear about what we need over the next 12, 24, 36 months. I think in terms of putting something quantifiable on that, it's about maintaining what we've built. We're very proud of the culture and the environment. I think the measure of that for me is everybody within the business is not only just great people, but they want to spend time with each other outside of work, off their own back. And I think for me, that is something that I always keep in mind and look at from afar and think, wow, we've brought these people together in one place that are all doing the same thing, all working towards the same goal. Yet, even after spending that time together where they're working, they still then want to go and socialize together. And I think that is a huge measure of being able to bring the right people into the business and maintain culture. But I think in terms of like metrics wise, we're looking at, I think the North Star for us by the end of the third year is to hit 5 million fee. That's what we're kind of shooting for.
Yeah.
We've got a quite aggressive growth plan, and we're pretty confident on how we're going to do that.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable, isn't it? I think it's not like, you have an outside expectations. You're a 9-year-old business as well, right? So, you have the foundation to be able to sustain that, which I think is really interesting. And a lot of people run at these things quickly, but then it sort of all falls down behind them because they haven't spent the time to, like you say, ultimately these things are people businesses, and to understand why you exist, and understand the behaviors that are important to you, and all that kind of stuff means that you can hire the right people if you have. So it sounds like you're on a really stable footing. And so, and yeah, I realized kind of time here, but just to kind of touch on that, because it sounds like you've obviously done some thinking. What is your approach to like recruitment? How do you find the right fit people? Because it's obviously quite clear that you have quite a clear and concise view of what good looks like internally.
Yeah, I think it's always been a tricky one in terms of communicating in a way which is genuine, because I think a lot of certainly agencies, people-based businesses will put a list of things on the table that sound like it's good culture, but in reality, it's just a list of things. I think with the way that we've always hired is, yes, skills come into it and capabilities come into it, but we've always been more interested in the person and what they're going to add to the business. And the word culture fit gets thrown around. I think that's probably it's a slightly poor assessment of how I would want someone to come into the business. I'm looking for, why is that person different? What are they going to do when they sit down with the rest of the team? How are the rest of the team going to respond to that person? What are they like on a personal level? What drives them? Where's the focus on a outside of work sort of level? And that's where I really try and hook in, and that's the ethos that I've tried to build into the management team when they're interviewing as well.
Hmm.
And I think this year is the first year where we've really pushed forward with recruiting off our own back, advertising roles off our own back, letting the teams do the full process, right through from advertising the roles, bringing the people into the business, and we're seeing that process is now bringing people into the business that match how we would approach bringing people into the business. That ethos and that view of making sure that people are adding on a personal level, not just at a skill level. And touch wood, turnover of staff is great.
Yeah, which is, an accolade in your environment where people are really in demand. And, it sounds exactly like you are at that typical kind of, scale, kind of level of, doing everything, hire some generalists, hire some specialists, and now you're allowing the specialists to lead. And, that's the key and possibly the hardest step, right? But it's also the most scalable from there. So, no, very interesting and, very, very rewarding, I'm sure. So just kind of very cognizant of your time. Final question then. Bit of a kind of quick fire kind of one just to end us with, trying to give a bit of value to those listening. Top agency growth tip. So if you're running an agency, you're thinking, oh, I'm still a bit worried about, kind of top of funnel. Any tips or tip?
Oh, that's a big question. Learn to say no would
Mm,
probably be one of the best ones that I could in all aspects. If someone's not the right fit from a recruitment standpoint, like we were just talking about, feel comfortable telling them that and saying, look, I don't think that you're going to be the right fit. Equally with clients, we've done a hell of a lot of work in surfacing what clients are going to be the best fit for us to deliver the results that we know we're capable of. We've done a really good job of refining what blockers stop that from happening. And I think, look, I know all too well the commercial pressures that come with having to get work through the door, but it does pay off in the long run working with brands that are like minded.
yeah, it's a very good tip. Very difficult to do as well, actually, if you're particularly if you're starting out. But it's worked 9 years in. So no, thank you very much, Lee, and thank you for your time as well. Just so quickly, if people want to get in touch with you, where's the best place to find you?
I mean, flauntdigital.com would be, I'm on there, I'm kicking around.
Sounds good. Well, look, thanks again, Lee, and congrats again on the longevity and the growth. And here's to many more years.
Thank
But
you.
it's been a good conversation. So thank you.
Cheers, Simon. Thank you.